Where we come from, people are responsible for their own actions.
And here, people are responsible for their own thoughts.
I am beginning to love Voyager more and more. What's up, lore masters? So, after publishing the last video, of which you'll find in the top right hand corner, I've had a lot of interest from the audience in breaking down the Voyager episode Random Thoughts, and doing it in a similar way. So much so that a few people actually fan-funded it to have it done, like, today. So, let's take a look at that. Unfortunately, unlike Counterpoint, this episode isn't as well written or as tight, with a few things that make absolutely no sense in it. However, like the other review, I'm going to more look at the meta and high-level aspects than breaking down the minutia. I will say two things, however. I think this episode is probably one of the most relevant and important, and that if you're a Star Trek fan, you need to watch it with an open mind, especially in 2020. And I ask that if you're watching this video and you get upset because you think I'm throwing politics and whatever bias you think I'm having, that you need to listen to it all the way to the end, when I'm going to be completely transparent. Trust me, it's not this part that's going to make you mad, it's probably at the end. Also, just so you guys know, this isn't going to constantly be what my channel is. It's probably an additional thing, I might do it maybe every week or so, but I'm going to keep all the other content, so don't worry. When analyzing the Voyager episode, Random Thoughts, from a more high levels perspective, like I've said, it appears that there are a few things that need to be accepted as truth. First, while everything is subjective, we can accept that there are a few things in most societies that people consider good, and there are some things that people consider bad. The Mari have created a civilization that, on the face of it, is generally considered great. Most people would absolutely agree that a society without crime, well, generally, is good. No murder, no theft, no stealing, etc. That sounds like a great thing. Their society had so little crime that the police force was being phased out.
I'm one of the last officers still working for the constabulary.
And no doubt, one of the best.
Again, on the whole, we can probably agree that this is a good thing. Next, Belenna's reaction, her thought, is generally going to be considered negative. Not that she should be punished for having it necessarily, don't worry, we'll talk about that later. But more importantly, what she thought, if it was acted out, is something most all of us would agree is bad. Attacking a man for a minor infraction isn't good.
But maybe for a split second. I mean, he should have been watching where he was going.
Also, while those on Voyager don't want anything bad to happen to Belenna, they're either indifferent or don't stand against the policies that are brought by the Marie. They don't even question it, really. Whether this is due to the Prime Directive or idiocy is irrelevant. They're simply staying neutral and claiming it's because it's not their culture and they can't judge. Let's start with Belenna. Belenna had a thought, an idea that most cultures, hers notwithstanding, would consider pretty abominable. Even those listening would agree that it's probably a bad thing. And most would state that it's an idea that people should stand against. Now let's hyper-focus on that and not forget it. It is really, really important. Others have tried to relate what had happened to Belenna to the suppression of neutral or even good ideas that have occurred in human history. But that's not it at all. Belenna had a very bad idea. We're not talking about someone who may have been an atheist in the 1800s saying that maybe God didn't exist. We're not talking about someone who wanted to be homosexual in the 1950s, or someone who was having the sin of a different skin color in the 1800s. What Belenna did isn't something that's looked at as bad because people don't like it with no reasonable cause. No, what she did is bad because there is objective evidence that the idea, taken to its natural consequences, are devastating. Belenna had a moment where she had bad intentions and for an instant was an advocate of it. No two ways about that. And Belenna accidentally introduced this very, very bad proposition to a people who, by this time, had not encountered such a thing. This idea infected a culture, and like an immunity system that had not encountered a virus quite like it, the idea spread without ability to counter. It changed everyone it touched. And the consequences of this idea spreading had what I think most would agree, objectively bad consequence. People began beating up and killing others because of just an idea, a thought. We don't know much, if anything, about the Marie culture. There do seem to be some aspects that seem totalitarian in nature, but not a lot's given. The people do appear somewhat submissive to the overall authority and happy to kneel down. Though there are some things that we do know. For instance, we know that they have laws about negative and subversive thoughts, that those who have violent ideas or beliefs are considered to be breaking the law, and most have to have their memories removed. You literally aren't allowed to think something that the state considers wrong.
It's an irrefutable fact that violent thoughts from others can lead to violent actions.
And that's something I haven't seen discussed by many of those who review this episode. An interesting piece is, it works. By completely removing all hateful and wrong think, the ideas that persevere are largely tame by comparison. Belenna's thought was so strong and bizarre that simply beating up people is something they never encountered. The types of hate that existed before this in the background would have had to have been barely malevolent in nature. The natural conclusion we get from this is that if you try to suppress thought and you're able to actually defeat the idea and remove it completely, the negative ideas that come after that may actually be more benign. However, that again shows the very problem when dealing with their culture, or even human culture. When you attempt to ban something and make it illegal, you ultimately create a black market for it. You can't ever completely get rid of a problem. You just force it to go underground and become much, much more potent. And by not allowing the culture to interact with it, they lose the ability to discern why it's bad, or at least to argue the point. I'm not trying to say that you shouldn't ban some things. For instance, widespread murder and theft are probably not something we should allow. Societies that do don't seem to really thrive. However, you can't deny that by outlawing it, you have empowered gangs and mafias in certain instances. Though I would say that death and theft are still something discussed today, and so we actually have a populace that understands why it's bad if it's presented to them. However, there are some things that historically, if we try to hide, ignore, or suppress them, lead us to very negative places. This is personified in the black market that the Marie justice system was designed to fight against. By outlawing negative thoughts to the point that you can't even have them or understand the concept, you've only driven it underground with people yearning to know more. It creates echo chambers for that type of thought that only continue to infect people and change them, all without society knowing of this growing problem. At least until it's too late. Thoughts aren't like murder or theft. They're more intangible. Arguably, the genesis of murder and theft come from thoughts. A thought or bad idea causes you to kill or to steal. So when you have a people who want to feel this thing that they're told is wrong, and they aren't told why it's wrong or why they should counter it, and then they're introduced to a rogue or more radical element of what they're trying to learn, it will spread and radicalize people, and ultimately can result in others dying. This episode is so brilliant, I wonder if the writers really knew the implications of what they were putting on paper. A society that has no idea nor understanding of how bad ideas are because those thoughts are purged by the government. This makes them completely unprepared to deal with it when they inevitably are introduced to the ideas. People won't understand why what they are doing is so wrong. It's never discussed, and this is a shame, but I think they should have at least had a conversation on how understanding what bad thoughts are and what they can do to you is important. There is a line at the end talking about how there may be an update to the justice system, but I highly doubt anything positive will happen. What likely is to result is a crackdown on this black market, again, making it more wanted. The fact that the Voyager crew never really challenged these ideas also surprises me. Even if we accept that they have to let it happen, because I don't know, that's honestly what that's another conversation. I'm really frustrated about that. The Prime Directive doesn't work that way. But anyway, even if we accepted the way they look at the Prime Directive is the way that it has to be, they can at least question the justice system. They could have argued against it. Again, this episode doesn't fully explore some of the great ideas presented, but it does give you quite a bit to think about when you look at it. There are pros and cons to both sides, and it comes down to what risks you want to take and what's the best for society. So that's about it for the Star Trek piece of this, the science fiction at least. If you're going to continue to listen, then you are willingly and knowingly walking into and accepting that I am about to get very personal, I am about to get political, and you are about to hear my opinion. If that pisses you off after this point, I'm just going to farm you for interactions and sympathy points on Twitter. It's just going to be a game to me. Now, let me be honest. My channel is based on being transparent, at least as transparent as I can be. I try to do that not only with the channel, things that are going on, but with myself. What you see is what you get. So here we go. There are, in my opinion, objectively bad ideas for human prosperity. These ideas are generally on the very fringe of both the left and the right spectrum. I do think that there is one side that has a dystopia that is far better than the other, but they're both dystopian ideologies if you go too far. Both Steve Shives and Richard Spencer want to live in a world and want to limit speech that they deem problematic. They want to be able to drive the public discourse. If they were ever successful, we would all live in a dystopian future. But I'd much rather live in a dystopia created by Steve Shives than that of Richard Spencer. And I am fairly confident I would have no platform if Steve Shives had his way. However, I bring that up because they both suffer from the same overall problem. They can't see the forest for the trees. If you try to quell an idea, if you make people feel bad for thinking it and don't allow it out into the open, then it will grow a black market. Like what we saw in this episode. I fully believe, personally, that's how Trump got into office. A large part of the left's base in the United States tried to make it about how you shouldn't have freedom of thought. They tried to quell the marketplace of ideas, and society, at least in the United States, stood up against that. A lot of those who voted for Trump, I truly believe, were fighting for what they were against, not what they were for. When you try to suppress speech, even horrific speech, you ultimately empower it. Again, in my opinion. One of the best recruiting tools for Spencer was when he was attacked and Steve Shives talked about how it was right to punch a Nazi. It was a recruiting frenzy, and racists became much more powerful because of it. To quote Leia Organa, "The more you tighten your grip, the more that will fall between your fingers." Just to push my point home, I think it is the peak of irony that a Scotland under Nicola Sturgeon would have laws that are in parity, that they are in sync with Nazi Germany. Which is to say, you can't mock Nazi Germany because it hurts someone's feelings. And yes, I fully believe the day Scotland decided that a dog doing a Nazi salute was punishable under law is the day the far-right elements and parties that would actually align with Nazi Germany became all that much more powerful. Why am I saying all this, and why am I even talking about it on a channel that is all about science fiction and lore? It is because a few years ago, about 5 to 10, maybe a little more, I could really see myself falling into this trap. When I started YouTube, again, it was about 10 years or so, I was very, very different. I fully believe I could have become a useful idiot for some of these people. And it could have fallen on either side. I could be a useful idiot for Steve Shives, or I could be a useful idiot for white nationalism. Not that I believe either of what they are saying, but because I would have gotten into an echo chamber that would have been hard to get out of. I had some pretty bad ideas. Not exceptionally bad, not Richard Spencer white nationalist bad, but bad all the same. But you know what happened when I joined YouTube? People debated me. Some people mocked me, some people attacked me, and some had earnest debates. There are people out there like Noel Plum, Dark Matter 2020, Serious Mind, Rational Roundtable, and others that helped me move forward. And because my ideas were allowed to be open, and I wasn't instantly canceled, I could talk to these people, I changed. To be clear, I don't really think that me or this channel is all that much. I have very little, if no influence. I think people overestimate what YouTube numbers actually mean. However, it would be dishonest to say that I don't have some influence, that I don't have some sway. I could, I think, if I wanted, create my channel in a way that pushed a message. Some would argue that I already do, but I think we probably disagree on what that message is. I'd hate to think the message that I'd be trying to push today if people hadn't debated me. If people hadn't at least looked at my ideas and not instantly shut me down. Ultimately, I truly believe this episode shows why we shouldn't punch a Nazi, not necessarily, but debate them. Because if you debate them within certain limits, you have the chance to change them, or to change those who follow them. It's not just the Nazis, though. Again, I don't think those like Anita Sarkeesian or Steve Shives are as bad as white nationalists, but I do think that they would cause a very negative effect on society. So they should be engaged as well. You can change minds and make our world better if we can just have these talks. Because I ultimately believe what I think this episode shows us. Suppression of thoughts, even bad ones, will ultimately hurt everyone. But all of these are my opinions. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next Lore Reloaded.